Hi, I'm Justin from FCC TV. Today I'm going to give you an overview of the GH6 and GH7 camera body. That means all the buttons and dials, just so that you can look at the camera and know what you're looking at. So the first thing you'll want to do is turn the camera on right here in the on-off lever. And if you're like me and you haven't put the battery in yet, nothing's going to happen. So let's turn that back off and put the battery in. And that is underneath. Right here is the battery compartment. You'll see open and lock. You'll switch the lever to open. It'll open. You grab the battery. All this gold and silver goes down into the camera and put the battery in. You'll see that click over, and then you'll move that lever to the lock position, and the camera is ready to be turned on. So the first thing you'll probably see once you turn the camera on is the monitor tell you that you have no memory card in there. So to put a memory card in, you'll turn it on its side, and on the right side you'll see this little lever to open this little door, and you'll see two memory card slots. One is a CF Express card slot right here, and it goes in like this. And you see an SD card slot right there, and it goes in like that. Now you don't need both a CF Express card and an SD card in the camera at the same time to make it work. You're probably used to an SD card, and that'll work for you in most scenarios. But to get the maximum capabilities out of this camera with the higher resolutions and all of that, you can use the CF Express for that, and it can write data a lot faster and have really big files. Once you have your card in, you can close the door and you're ready to record. If the monitor is still just showing a black screen, you probably just need to take your lens cap off here, and now you can see what the camera will be capturing. So before we get into the lens, let's just remember to put our wrist strap on, safety first. That is what we should be doing every time we're handling the camera. So our lens, this is a 12 to 60 Leica zoom lens, and it zooms like that. You turn this wheel to zoom, and it is a parfocal lens, so if you're in focus on somebody and you zoom in, it will stay in focus, which is nice. The focus wheel is this guy right there, closer to the end of the lens. And then this right here is a UV filter. It's just a little piece of glass in front of the lens to protect the lens. On the side here, you see AF and MF. That means autofocus and manual focus. We always keep it at AF on the lens. And then for right here, it says power OIS, on and off, and that is the stabilizer in the lens. And it actually talks really nicely to the camera. So if this is off in the lens, it's also going to be off in the camera, and vice versa. So if you turn this on, it'll turn it on in both the lens and the camera. So if you are ready to start recording, you can hit this red record button on the top. You'll notice the tally lamp on the front and the tally lamp on the back turn on. And you'll see this red outline around the monitor and this little red dot saying that you're recording. You'll see the count of how long you've been recording start to go up. And if you want to stop recording, you can hit this red button again, and it will stop. On the front, you have another record button right there, and it does the same thing. It just records. If you're in a movie mode, you can hit this shutter button that would normally be for pictures, and it will also start recording your video. So you can hit the shutter button again, and it'll stop. Let's do an overview of all of the icons that are on this monitor real quick. So at the top left, you'll see the white balance setting. So if I were to change this white balance setting, it would go into a different icon. And if you don't see anything there, that just means it's in auto white balance mode. So next, it says STD, that is for standard. And that is just the photo style. It's kind of how the colors are working in your current image. Next to it is kind of the codec setting that you have. So it's in MP4. 4K is your resolution. It could be full HD. but it's in 4K in this instance. 42010L, that's all just like color stuff. 2997p, that means it's in 30 frames per second, or 29.97 frames per second. Right here is the area of the sensor that it's using. You can change this camera to have a cropped sensor, so if you are using all of your sensor, it'll be a full frame. AFC stands for autofocus continuous, and it's just telling us what focus mode we're in. Right next to it is kind of an autofocus setting as well. We'll get into that later. Next to it is telling us what image stabilizer setting we're in. Right now we're in dual stabilization. Down here we see that we are in movie mode as opposed to like one of the picture modes. Right next to it is the metering mode. Right there is the shutter angle. You might have heard of shutter speed. We use shutter angle here. Right there is f-stop or aperture or iris, whatever you want to call it. Right there is your exposure meter. There is your ISO reading. Right here it's telling you that you have a memory card in both slots 1 and 2, and it's telling you also how much record time you have left on that first memory card based on your current codec. And then, of course, at the bottom right, we have the battery level. And last, this little row right here, you can hit this button and it will reveal a few settings, but we won't get into those until a little later on in a different video. Okay, so one problem that you might run into with this camera is when you touch certain buttons or something, you might notice that the screen just turns off and you don't really know why. So that is due to this button right here called the LVF button. So what it's doing when it's randomly turning off is it's actually using this little sensor. It's kind of a proximity sensor. So when you put your eye up to the camera, it actually turns on a little monitor inside there so that you can use this little viewfinder to take video or photo. And in order to turn that setting off, you hit this button, the LVF button, and it actually toggles between 3 settings. So it can be always on in the viewfinder eyepiece, or it can be always on the monitor. That's the one that we prefer for video. Or it can be auto, to where it turns on this little eye sensor. So when you turn this, it'll turn off the main monitor and go straight to the viewfinder monitor inside the camera. Okay, so one more thing you might want to know about this monitor is it's got a really great articulating screen. You can turn it in pretty much whatever direction you want, which is really nice. And my favorite part is that you can pull it up toward you like that. So this is really great when you're filming kind of low and you want to look down. It would be much worse if you had to have a flat screen. It's a really great feature. Love it a lot. Okay, so let's get into like the buttons and dials of this camera. And first, I just want to point out this lock button. So if we have it in the lock button, some of these buttons and dials will not work. So we want to make sure we have it in the unlock position. Right next to it, we have the playback button. So right there, it will go to whatever we have recorded in the past. It'll show us the videos that we recorded, and we can play them back, listen to them, all of the above. And you might wonder how to get out of that screen. The only way to get out of playback is to also hit the playback button a second time, and it'll go back to your normal operations. Right next to the on-off switch, you'll see this dial. And this dial allows you to change what mode your camera is in. Right now, I'm in movie mode, and I want you to change your camera to movie mode 2 if you're following along in this tutorial. The other important one that we want for video is if you're just getting started with this camera, IA is also very useful. It's a full auto mode, so you don't have to change anything. But if you want to change this mode to movie mode, if you're in something else or wherever you want, if you turn this, it might not move at all. So what you have to do is you have to hit this middle button here, and I'll show you it right here. This middle button, it comes out, it pops up, And once it pops up, you can change the mode. So I'm going to change it to movie mode and then lock it. The exposure compensation button right here allows me to tell the camera that I want the auto ISO to aim higher or lower than it normally would. So if I want my shot to be a little brighter than the auto ISO would normally do, I want to go to +1 or +2. And if I want it to be a little darker, I can tell the auto ISO to go a little darker. So that is what that is. We normally keep it at 0, but it depends on whatever situation you're in. The next button is audio right there. So when you hit that, you'll see kind of your audio menu here. I can hit my levels here and adjust how sensitive my audio levels are. And then we've got lots of other options that we'll go into more in our audio video. Next, we have these dials right here. These two in the front and the back dial. So the back dial changes our shutter angle. And you might be used to shutter speed, and if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, then a shutter angle of 180 is 60 shutter speed. When you do turn this dial, it does change it just a little bit, and that's just fine. So it's something called synchro scan to be able to change the shutter angle minutely in order to possibly take out some light flickering in your scene if you need. But this front dial, let's talk about it. It is your f-stop, or your aperture, or your iris, whatever you want to call it. When you are in a manual mode and you change this front dial, it will change your aperture. Okay, so let's briefly go into detail about this dial right here, this mode dial. So if I want to move it, I can move it to the picture modes right here. This is manual, so if you're trying to take a picture and you want full manual, that's what M is for. S is, it allows you to change your shutter speed, but it will auto set the ISO and aperture. A, you can set your aperture, but it'll auto set your ISO and shutter speed. P is you can set your ISO, but it will auto set your shutter speed and aperture. IA, great function, full auto, no worries, Hakuna Matata. The C4 through C1, these are custom modes that we have set so that we can just set them really quickly for whatever situation that we are in. We'll go into those in another video, but for now, like I said, we are in movie mode. To change the focus mode, you use this little dial. Right now it's in autofocus continuous, which is constantly looking for the right focus. Autofocus single kind of gets its focus and kind of stays there for a while. And then manual focus is you are setting the focus. But you might also remember that on the lens there is an autofocus or manual focus switch. So if it's on autofocus right here and manual focus right here, which one wins out? They are conflicting. So the way this camera works is if either of these are on manual focus, it's in manual focus. If both of them are in autofocus, then it's in autofocus. If both of them are in manual, it's obviously in manual. So we keep this one on autofocus at all times and then use this to decide which one we want to use. So when you're in autofocus, this button right here in the middle will allow you to change which autofocus you are using. There are lots of different options like the full area or just the small area or human detect, animal detect, lots of stuff like that. When you're in manual focus, that middle button actually does something else. It does a picture-in-picture mode. And so what that does is it does a digital zoom just on the monitor so that you can have a better idea of how in focus you are. So it'll just take a tiny little section of what you're actually shooting so that you can just punch in real quick, check your focus, and then come back out. This button, AF on, will help you get a quick autofocus even when you're in manual focus. So if you press and hold it, the camera will get a quick autofocus into whatever is in this little box here. And to change the size or location of this box, you can use the monitor as a touchscreen and use the dials to increase or decrease the size of the box. Okay, below the AF on button, we have this joystick. And this joystick is all function buttons. And function buttons are things that we set custom, things that we thought would be useful to have quick access to as far as settings go. You don't have to know these function buttons or use them, but let's just figure out what they do real quick. If you push the joystick to the left, you get white balance set, which is useful for when you're using a white balance card to get the correct white balance in a room. If you push the joystick to the right, you get the image area of video, which is whether you have the sensor cropped or not, so full sensor or a cropped sensor. And then if you push the joystick down, you'll get zebras, which are going to give you lines on your screen, anything above 90% exposure brightness. So really bright areas will start having lines on them. If you push the joystick up, it'll give you zebras at above 100%. So really, really bright stuff that are overexposed. If you just push the joystick in, it'll give you zebras 1 and 2. It'll give you both of those zebras. So below the joystick, we have the Q button, and that is for the quick menu. And the main thing we use the quick menu for is to get to metering mode. And metering mode is another way to tell your camera how you want it to use auto ISO, in the instances where you're using auto ISO, of course. Right here we have the menu button, and there are directional buttons around the menu button as well as a dial. So the menu button itself just takes us to the menu, and the menus are a topic for another day, but the menus are very well laid out in this camera, which is really nice. The main thing you'll use probably is the My Menu section, where we have laid out all of our favorite settings that we want to access very quickly. And that's that little guy right there on the menu. When you hit the up button on this D-pad, you'll get the waveform monitor. So you can move this anywhere around, and you can even change the size of it based on what you need. You can hit set and it'll just stay there, and it'll tell you the general brightness and darkness of what's in your shot. So if I hit it again, it'll disappear. When I hit down, it's actually just this little lining outside of the screen. It's a frame marker, so it's telling us what 16:9 framing is. That's only useful when you're filming like 5.7K in a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's useful to know what widescreen is, because that's kind of standard. So that's probably not going to be very useful for you. The left side is the level gauge, so it'll tell you whether your camera is level or not. You can make that go away. On the right, you'll see the audio levels. So you can just monitor audio levels through your monitor here. Very easy. This dial right here controls the headphone volume, but you won't be able to see that unless you plug in headphones like that. And now you'll see right there, headphone volume. This back button is very useful for when you're going through your menus and you want to go back, or quick menu and you want to go back. But when it's just like this, there's another purpose for it. We have assigned it as a function button to act as our list of recording codecs. So we've got 4K 30 MP4, we've got 4K 60 MP4, we've got full HD 120 frames per second. It's just a quick menu of what we think will be most likely used on this camera. So if I hit it again, it'll disappear. This DISP button right here is display, and it'll go through a couple of different display modes. It'll hide all of these icons, or it'll give you like this little quick menu here, or it will totally make your display go black, and back to normal. You just keep hitting it until something works. So as you've seen, we've programmed quite a few function buttons in here for easy use. There's actually more though. So if we flip the camera right here, there are 2 more function buttons, so they can be accessed by using your fingers right here when you're holding the camera. So the top one is our spot meter. So what that does is it allows you to take this little spot to any spot in your frame, and it'll tell you exactly how bright it is. So 0 being 100% black, 100% being completely white. This little spot is 61%. And that's very useful for gauging how bright your skin tones are and things like that. So this bottom button here is dynamic range boost. And what dynamic range boost does is it, well, boosts your camera's dynamic range. So it will see more details in the highlights of your image, and it will see more details in the shadows of your image. One downside of dynamic range boost is it does limit your range of ISO. Previously, you could go down as far as 50 or 100 ISO, but now you can only go down as far as 800, unless you turn off dynamic range boost. Okay, we've covered the function buttons, and we talked about the record button earlier. This button actually releases our lens. We don't recommend you do that until you know how to work this camera quite a lot better. But if you want to switch out lenses, you can use that button there. This is where you would put a flash if you were doing flash photography. All right, this last style here is more for photos, so we'll breeze through it. This right here is just taking a single picture. These are burst modes, so you can take multiple pictures at once. This one is high resolution, so if you want to take a super high resolution picture, that's your guy. This one is time lapse, and this one is self timer. On the left side of this camera here are some slots for some inputs and outputs. So up here we have the mic input, so if you have a 3.5 millimeter based mic, you can put that in there. Right here we have the headphone input, so you can monitor your audio through that. Right here we have USB-C, so you can plug in the camera to the camera's charger while you're recording with this camera. It's really nice in situations where you don't want to run out of battery and you have that flexibility. It's great. You can also plug in the camera to a computer if you need. Right here is an HDMI out. If you need to send whatever you're getting into this camera out somewhere else, that is where you would do that. On the other side of the camera, next to the memory card slots, we have this remote slot. And that is just if you want to attach a camera remote to this guy. Last up, we have the shoe mount cover and the shoe mount. So this is just the shoe mount cover. This is a hot shoe mount. So that means it sends data and power to another object if you want. It can also be used as a cold mount, which is just literally a mount for something on your camera with no data or power. But this one is special, so it does. So you want to make sure you keep track of this little shoe mount cover. All right, that's it. Hope this video was helpful. Very simple, but we'll have others to go into more detail later. Also, if you live in the Washington, D.C. area, you can actually become a member with us at Falls Church Community Television, and you will gain access to our equipment and our facilities and have your content aired on our cable channel. So, link for all that is in the bio. Read the information. Have a nice day.